Good afternoon, Watershed Councils, Land Trusts, and Conservation Districts of Oregon. Welcome to our webinar. This is the Oregon Conservation Partnership. My name is Vanessa Green, and I'm the Executive Director of the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils. And I'm joined here today by David Allen, who is the owner of, oh gosh, David, I'm so sorry.
Development for Conservation. Yeah.
Man, big fail right away. Sorry, folks. We're going to be talking today about building a fundraising program from scratch. And I know that this is something that is near and dear to our hearts. It's something that we often run out of time for, or we feel that there are barriers to, or it's something that we wish we had thought of 5 years ago and we're further ahead than we are. So the idea today is to break down some of the barriers and explain some of the tricks and get some good, frank advice on how to begin or how to improve what we are doing. So excited to have us. We have an hour and a half today, and we're going to do a presentation for about an hour and save a half hour at the end for questions and discussions. And I'd like to prompt the conversation a little bit by saying that as we go in the chat box, you can type in things that surprise you as you learn about them, things that sound new to you or are in a new context. So feel free to say those things and we can get the chat started that way. I want to say too that David is welcome to, he's invited you to ask questions as we go. So instead of saving all the questions for the end, we can kind of interrupt as we like. You can ask your questions by typing them into the chat box, or you have the option of hitting your little raise hand icon, and I will keep my eye open for those, and then I can manually unmute you so that you can ask your question yourself. One nice feature of the chat box is that if you have something to ask that maybe sounds a little embarrassing to you, or you don't want to out yourself in front of all of your friends, you have the option of just asking it anonymously, and I'll ask the question for you. So that's a nice feature of the GoToWebinar platform as well. So with that said, I will go ahead and introduce David. David is the Director of Development for Conservation. He assists conservation organizations and raises money for individual donors by improving renewal, cultivation, and major gift systems. He brings 30 years of experience to the practice and has worked with the Nature Conservancy in Oregon, Texas, and Wisconsin. And we are happy to bring his expertise to Watershed Councils as well. So with that, David, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and we're really glad to have you here.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation to be a presenter, and I appreciate the opportunity to serve one of my favorite places in the country. So yes, I was part of the Nature Conservancy scene in the early part of my career at the Nature Conservancy's Oregon chapter in Portland. I had migrated to Portland like a lot of people do from Eugene, where I was a duck where I went to college. Moved around quite a bit since then. I now live in Madison, Wisconsin, which is as close to Eugene as I could find in Wisconsin. I'm going to share my screen here, which is going to take us through the slides, and I'll do a little bit more introduction. Can you say something, Vanessa? Did that work? Is that on the screen now?
I can see your screen. It's ready to go. And
perfect.
Folks, I will let you know. I'm going to put into chat the URL to David's website as well, so you can find his slides on that website and follow along.
Perfect. So I've sort of aimed this at a pretty elementary level, which is the way I'm sort of reading the audience here. Feel free to get me to slow down or ask questions. Vanessa will be monitoring the chat. I'm not going to monitor the chat, so Vanessa, please interrupt me if there's something that we need to address right away. Otherwise, we hope to have plenty of time for questions at the end. When I started fundraising as a consultant full-time in 2009, I'd been doing it for about a decade before that, but more on a nights and weekends basis. When I started full-time consulting in 2009, adopting the name Development for Conservation, I really, all of my professional experience had been in conservation. And I really, even though I was open to working for other nonprofit organizations, I really wanted to focus in the conservation space. It's where my heart is, it's where my passions are, it's where I want to work and live. And so all of my clients now, and most of my clients even then, are land trust organizations, river groups, advocacy groups, nature centers, sort of the periphery of organizations that are connected in some way to nature. And so the Development for Conservation name is intentionally a pun. And I hope that it's not lost on anybody that it is. The website, developmentforconservation.com, is a resource website, and I'm hoping that you will go there and download not only the PDF of the slides on this presentation, but also a host of other resources as well. I do write a weekly blog that has to do with fundraising. It's all fundraising in the nature conservation space, and so I'm happy to share that information with you as well. The way you get there is you go to the website, you look at the resources or the About Us tab, and then the resources, and the PDF of these slides is all the way at the bottom. I did 2 webinars yesterday. You'll find those slides there as well. You're welcome to download those on if you want to. One is on diversifying your board. The other one is on you'll see a lot of the similar slides to this one, is sort of essentials of fundraising. So what I have for you today is sort of 3 basic big pieces. One is some definitions that I have about gifts and giving and donors and what kinds of things, how people end up giving and why they end up giving, and then some essential concepts and an approach to fundraising that I hope is intuitive and obvious, but it may be intimidating because it's not automatic for people who don't live in the fundraising space. And then I did put together some sort of immediate steps, sort of a step-by-step approach to starting from scratch, which is what the name of the program is today. And then we'll leave some time for discussion and questions and reactions at the end as well. So without further ado, let's start really at the very beginning. And I think this is an important piece, maybe pathetically obvious, but important nonetheless. A gift is something that is freely given. There is no quid pro quo. There is no expectation that you will receive anything of value in return. Why is this important? Because people do get things in return. They get a newsletter, they get information, they get emails, they get opportunities to go for hikes or walks or canoes or any number of other things. Let me turn this off here. They get, in some cases, because they're members, they get information that has the logo information on it, so a decal or a bumper sticker or something like that. All of this is fine because it doesn't cross a line. When the donation comes with something else, though, a dinner ticket, a discount to the bookstore, or something else, it changes from the nature of being a gift to the nature of being a transaction. And anytime there's a transaction and a margin that is a profit margin for the organization, that's still fundraising, but it's no longer a gift because transactions are not gifts. And this is an important concept in fundraising because gifts quite often are repeatable, are renewable, whereas transactions, they're done when the transaction is complete. In order to get another a gift or amount of money, you would have to create another transaction. So in that spirit, dinner tickets, auction items, sponsorships, golf tournaments, you name it, these are not gifts, and they're probably not renewable. Um, there's a special category for memorials and honoraria. These are things that maybe somebody read in the paper that so-and-so died, and they want to give money to that particular organization, or that the family is representing, that in lieu of gifts, you can make a gift to this organization. Those are gifts, but they're not gifts to you. And because of that, they're also not renewable, and then they're not treated in the same way as, and the givers are not treated in the same way as donors. So in that spirit, then a donor is somebody who gives a gift. And a donor is it's important to sort of keep track of donors, to be good stewards of donors, to show appreciation for donors. It's also important to, in terms of prediction and going forward, how much money are we going to be able to raise next year, to be able to know how many people are donors, are giving money to your organization, and in what capacities. Because at some level, we want to try to figure out not only how much money we're going to raise this next year, in this next period of time, but we also want to try to figure out whether the things that we're doing are sufficient to raise the amount of money that we need to raise 2 years, 3 years, 5 years away from now. If we're not thinking out that far into the future, then we're just going to keep doing the same things and sort of keep getting the same results. Perhaps we need to change strategies in order to meet the demands of the future. And in that sense, it's important to know who our donors are and how many donors we actually have that might be able to continue giving to the organization. I also want to draw the distinction between restricted and unrestricted giving. Again, this is something that you're probably already aware of, but and it's sort of, I'm running the risk of being sort of pathetically obvious here again. But a restricted gift is a gift that is restricted by the donor. It is, hey, I'll make this gift to you, but I want you to use it for this specific purpose, or only for this specific program. A common example in our space is, I'll make a gift toward the purchase price of a piece of property, but I'm not going to give you any money for the management of that property, and that becomes a problem down the road for management. It is restricted in the sense that it is only for a given purpose, and it doesn't mean that the donor is determining the organizational purpose. It just means that when you accept it with whatever strings were attached. And in that way, it's differentiated from unrestricted giving. So an unrestricted gift then is given in support not of a program or project, but in support of a mission, of the general purpose of the organization. And that's important because most of the time the inference here is that unrestricted giving is renewable. If somebody does it 1 year, then they're more likely to be willing to do it again next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. And they're solicited that way. That's part of the reason why we use the language of membership, although not every organization does use the language of membership, is because then when we can talk about membership renewals and membership dues, and sort of gives us a language that we can use. It isn't critical, but the idea that we come the same time of the year next year and ask them to do it again, that is a critical element of this fundraising business. So a major gift is a gift that is about how the donor feels about making it. When it's a considerable decision, then it's a major decision for them. It becomes a major gift decision for the donor, and that's independent of how much money is involved. There's some generalities that we can draw, but for one person, a $5,000 gift is a no-brainer. For another person, $5,000 is an enormous amount of money. So it's not about how much money we're talking about. It's about how big of a decision that particular piece is. I need to pause here because I meant to say something earlier and I forgot. I've done a lot of workshops in person, and in the last year, I've done a lot of workshops in a webinar format. And among many obvious pieces of this is that what people want to see from the slides is different. So what I've heard and the feedback that I've gotten is that whereas you might not want to see words on a page in a workshop, in an in-person workshop, you do want to see them in a Zoom environment or in a webinar environment, and that's because then the notes are really easy to capture and pull off the screen. So most of my, not all of them, but most of my slides are sort of words on a page. And for those of you that bothers, I'll apologize in advance. So with that said, here's one that's not words on a page. So when somebody makes a gift to a particular organization, there's sort of three different levels to this in terms of the decision that gets made. A decision that is literally a no-brainer. I've got it in my wallet. I've got it in my checking account. Here's a check. You need this. I agree with you. I like the organization. Here's a gift. That is more or less a token gift. It doesn't really cost me a whole lot in order to make the gift. At some point, I stop feeling like, hey, that's a no-brainer. And I start thinking like, okay, maybe I should give some thought to this, or maybe I need to move some things around. Maybe I need to talk to my spouse before I make this decision to give. That crosses into a sort of a middle area that I'm calling substantial gift. Again, not the dollar amount, it's how I feel about making that gesture or giving that support. And at some point, even the substantial gets high enough that I just can't do it easily. I'm going to have to give something up in order to make this gift possible. And that crosses into sort of a sacrificial area where I'm not going to go out to eat this week, and instead I'm going to give that money to an organization, or I'm not going to go on vacation, or I'm going to delay this or that or the other thing in order to make a gift possible. Plan giving at the end of one's life. I might give it to this organization instead of giving it to another organization, or even giving it to my children. So there's a difference between sort of token no-brainer gifts, substantial gifts in the middle, and sort of sacrificial giving. Annual giving is typically on the lower end of this scale. And when I say lower end, I don't mean like $250 lower end. I mean like maybe up to maybe $10,000 to $15,000. Many people make $1,000 gifts. Many people make $5,000 gifts. Some people even make $10,000 and $15,000 and $20,000 gifts as their annual unrestricted gift. And really the request for that money is based upon history. You did it last year. You did it the year before. It's October. Let's do it again. Major gifts or restricted gifts are in this substantial to sacrificial range, where it's something that I'm not going to do on a renewable basis. I'm going to do it in a once in a while fashion when I really believe that this program or this project or this effort is worth an extra boost. Sometimes you see major gifts in a multi-year pledge. Maybe sometimes you see them in a specific check that's written or a specific transaction that's made. But it is either way. It's not necessarily a renewable decision. It's something that happens just once in response to a specific appeal. So let's talk about dollar amounts. There was a time when $100 was a small fortune. Many people take $100 at a time out of an ATM. And Part of the reason for that is because ATMs, charge us money to take it out. But part of it because $100 just doesn't last as long as it used to. When we're spending cash money out of our pocketbooks, it's really it really goes pretty quickly. So $100, 200, $120, even up to $200 is quite literally pocket change in 2021. We don't like thinking of it that way, but it is very common. And a very common transaction is to take $100 at a time out of an ATM. $1,000 used to pay for a luxury vacation, a couple of weeks in wherever. $1,000 is not that much money anymore. $1,000 is what we spend on alcohol or designer coffee. It's what we spend on cell phone service or internet service. I would say prior to 2020, when everybody stopped driving, it wasn't unusual for some people to have to spend $1,000 in a month or two just on gasoline. So I'm one of those people, by the way. I work all over the country. I put 100,000 miles on Delta in 2019. I put only 2,000 miles on my car in 2020. So it's not, gasoline isn't quite the same as it used to be. But still, when you think about internet service and cable service and television and cell phone and sort of alcohol, $1,000 doesn't go anywhere near as far as it used to. So for a lot of people, I would say even for most people, especially if they can parse it out on a monthly basis, $1,000 isn't even a major gift anymore. Or we think about it like it should be, but it's really not. My parents bought a home in suburban Dallas, Texas. I'm originally from Texas, and I still remember this was in 1969, and I was a kid, obviously, but they paid $19,000 for this house. This was a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, pool in the backyard, pretty high living for this middle class family that my family was. But obviously times have changed. You can't buy a new car. You can't buy very many new cars for $20,000 any longer. So my point is that our old ideas about what $100 would get you, what $1,000 would get you, and even what $20,000 will get you have changed a lot. And we haven't necessarily kept up in the fundraising community. We haven't kept up with those same ideas. So just speaking very frankly, time is not the same as money. When somebody gives time, it's not the same as giving money. And I don't have enough time or I don't have enough money is really not about how much money they have. It means I choose to spend my time and money elsewhere. And there shouldn't be any judgment about that, but we shouldn't take, I don't have the money to do this. That's not literally true. And we shouldn't react to it like it's literally true. Obviously, it's literally true for some people, but that's not most of the people that we're talking about and to. So what do you do with this information? Most people take $100 at a time out of an ATM. I would feel very comfortable asking just about anybody for $100. If you believe in this, if you believe in this program, if you believe in this project, if you believe that what we're doing is worth doing, then please make a gift of $100. Not everybody's going to say yes, obviously, but it's not an unfair request. For most people, $20 a month is still in that sort of token range. But $20 a month is $250 a year, $240. That's not a trivial gift to the organization. So maybe one of our strategies is to take the idea of giving $250 and parse it out on a monthly basis. Hey, only 20 bucks a month, and make a gift that way. And finally, $1,000 a year is really only 20 bucks a week. So thinking about that as whether or not it's fair or comfortable, it's probably not unfair to ask someone to make a gift if they really believe what we're doing. It's really probably not unfair to ask people to give even 20 bucks a week. I had an executive director in Mississippi, of all places, and he his family's practice was to go to the ATM and then go from the on a Saturday morning and then go from the ATM to the grocery store. And he had it sort of figured out how much money to take out every time, and he was pretty close. So he added, for a year, he added $20 to that. And he put a $20 bill in a jar on his counter for a year. And when when he went to the board meeting in January of the following year, he put the jar in the middle of the table, and he said, "This is $1,000 that my family is giving to this organization. If I can do it, every single person around this table can do it." And you know what? It at 20 bucks a week, it probably didn't. It's not like he didn't feel it at all, but he probably didn't feel it anywhere near as much as it would have felt if he had to write $1,000 check at the end of the year. So some of this is not about what to do; it's about how to do it and creating opportunities for people to do something that they really want to do. If our belief that somebody can't do it, if that prevents us from asking, it's a mistake. And we're actually saying this particular person over here, they can't do it, so I'm not even going to ask. And I think ultimately that kind of thing is self-defeating. That ultimately we need to be willing to ask. We need to be willing to say, hey, look, this is so important that it is worth doing right here, right now, right for this particular project or program or purpose. Some core concepts that I think are important, and maybe many people won't. This will be unfamiliar territory, but I want you to think about it as a way to start thinking about how to raise money. Almost all of the money given away in the U.S. every year comes from an individual. Many people think that money comes from foundations and corporations. It isn't true, and it really hasn't ever been true. This graph says that 7% comes from public foundations and 5% comes from business. That's been a more or less true for the last 40 years. To those of you who are surprised by this, all I can say is it's a myth that is widely perceived by a lot of people who are not very familiar with fundraising. 70% comes directly from individual donors. By the way, the total pie here is $450 billion with a B, billion with a B. Another 9% comes from estates and life insurance and things that happen at the end of one's life. And another 9% are distributed through a family foundation or a donor advised fund. And if you add all that up, it's like 88%, 88 cents out of every dollar given away is given away by an individual donor. So if you're thinking about how to raise money or where to raise money, where to go to raise money, we want to start with our individuals. These people give money away for all kinds of different reasons. And some of them are social, some of them are mission related and purposeful, some of them are sort of other parts and pieces, other reasons. Many are emotional in source, so they don't they don't respond. The donors don't respond in general to rational and intellectual arguments. So it's not like we can logic our way into convincing someone to give. What we need to do instead of selling or instead of convincing, what we need to do instead is we need to think about finding people who are already there, finding people who have an emotional connection to nature or to the land or to something else, and asking them to act on that emotion by supporting an organization that's doing important work in that area. When we get all wrapped up in numbers and acres and species and cubic feet of water and sort of all this sort of number stuff, it's the space that we live in, but it's not the space that people respond to from a fundraising standpoint. We need to talk about love. We need to talk about smells. We need to talk about what it feels like to walk through the forest. We need to use words like cathedral. I love the cathedral forest at Opal Creek. I think that it's a bring language in that speaks to the emotion. It will help us raise money a lot faster than using language that is much more sort of sciencey and harder to sort of penetrate. The person that really articulated this for me in a big way was a guy named Simon Sinek. He's got a TED Talk called "How Great Leaders Inspire Action," and if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to go find it. And his basic premise, which he's got there on the screen, but I'll put it on my screen as well, is that we get really tied up in what we do and to some degree how we do it, but we don't ever get to the why we do it. What do we believe about the world? What do we believe about the work that is going to drive how we do things and what we end up doing? And his premise is that if you will get in touch with your why, with what you believe, and you talk about that first instead of last, then you will attract people to you who believe what you believe. And then what you're doing and how you're doing it becomes a whole number of things that relate to that why you're doing it. And people will buy what you're selling, people will give to what you're doing, but they'll give over and over and over again because the why doesn't change, that what you believe about the world doesn't change. So this, in fact, is what donors need to know: what you are doing, how you are doing it, why you are doing it, what you believe in, the programs and opportunities that you're running, and the outcomes and the results, the physical manifestation on the ground of what you're doing. And they also need to believe that you are capable of getting it done. It is a no-brainer that if I think you are like toast, you can't possibly do this work, then I'm not going to invest in you. So in the practical application of that is that we don't talk about the sky is falling. We don't talk about this is not going to work, or we're desperate. We don't talk about save our budget. We talk about what is going to be accomplished by the work that we're doing. We talk about what is going to be accomplished by the donor. One of the things that Sinek says is that, which I love a lot, is that people care a lot more about what they do with their money than they care about what we're doing with their money. So we talk in terms of, when we communicate with donors, we talk about what we believe, but we also talk about, and by inference, what they believe, but we also talk about what they are doing with their money. This is so important. This is what you've accomplished, what you and the other donors have accomplished with this. Sinek's point is that you start with the belief, and then you talk about programs, and then you talk about outcomes. Another really sort of core concept in fundraising is that the people you're going to raise money from are already giving you money. And that's hard to hear for organizations that are just starting. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, right. But here's what is true about that. The exercise of bringing somebody from I've never given to you before to I've made one gift, that is a marketing exercise. That's about putting your message out there and seeing who responds to it. And oftentimes it costs more money. In the work that I've done, I've actually quantified this. It costs between $120 and $200 to bring in a new donor. If that new donor only gives you $50, you're losing money hand over fist. The problem is that that's the reason why we need seed money. The benefit is that the following year, it might cost you only a couple of cents to raise a couple $100. And so the money that you're actually going to net as a net result, the money that you're going to bring in is money that is it is from donors who already are in your camp. So one of the challenges up front is to find seed money that'll help you get started, but also to bring in to raise money from the people who are already giving right away, and to sort of not wait with that. That's a pretty important piece. And so if you're talking about people who haven't given you any money yet, just understand that that's a marketing exercise. The great majority of our money coming in right now is coming from boomers. This is a Howe and Strauss book called The Generations, the history of America's future, and really that what he's done is he's named the generations. The GI generation is just about gone. They're 100 years old now, and they're really a non-factor in fundraising. The silent generation is a generation of people who are in their sort of late 60s and 70s now. Some of the in early 80s. Those are going to be people that are still relevant from a fundraising standpoint, but they've pretty much made their giving known, and what's going to happen now is sort of their estate giving. Boomers are going to be your sort of 50 to 65 to 70 group, and that's what's driving most of the giving in the US right now. This is the group, these two groups here, the silents and the baby boomers. I hear more organizations say, hey, we're getting older. Our generation is getting older, and we need to focus on bringing in new people. And the response to that is to reach directly out of the sort of the silents and the boomers directly into the millennials. And millennials are in their 30s and early 40s. They're starting their careers, they're starting their families. They don't have a lot of disposable income, and the money that they're giving away is to children's activities. It's really not yet to sort of larger issues. The problem with that scenario is that we're skipping a generation. The generation that is represented by this sort of Gen X people, these are people in their late 40s and 50s and early 60s who are beginning to get to retirement age, and they are their kids are graduating from college. They have more disposable time and more disposable income than they ever have. And so if we can focus our fundraising efforts on this sort of boomer and Gen X group, instead of reaching for millennials already, then we'll raise more money. This has a lot of implications for how we communicate with donors. And I want to just touch on some of that. Partly driven by sort of this need to get money now instead of thinking about these as long-term relationships. What's happening is we're looking for sort of shiny new objects. We're looking for crowdfunding, we're looking for video, we're looking for things that will attract millennials. And instead, in my opinion, I think that's a mistake. I don't think that we need to stop doing that necessarily completely, but I think we need to focus in other areas. We need to focus on boomers and Gen Xers. We need to focus on paper communications, paper newsletters, paper renewal notices, paper appeals. Paper lasts longer than email does. People have a more of an opportunity to come back and revisit it if they didn't make a snap decision when they first got it. Even millennials will tell me that they went online to give after they got a paper request for money, as opposed to getting an electronic request for money. It also means that the more we can engage people directly with the land, walking on trails, canoeing, kayaking, fishing, all bird watching, all of these activities, if we can bring people to the land, it will help us raise money. This is somewhat true with millennials, but it is big time true with people who have a lot more time and a lot more disposable income to deal with, meaning boomers and Gen Xers. Personal relationships are critically important to especially for big money fundraising. And that goes double if the people involved in the relationship are board members. So boomers and Gen Xers are going to want to know who's on your board. They're going to want to meet them. They're going to want to understand what those people's relationship with the land is, what they believe, what's important to them, because they're going to want to see what their common values are that they're seeing with themselves. This leads to major gift fundraising and planned giving, which I'm really not going to talk about today. But this idea that you spend time with people and you spend time with people outdoors these are very powerful predicates to effective fundraising. It can't just be done at an arm's length. It's got to be done in a more personal way. So it's less about selling. It's more about finding. It's less about asking people to help us, and it's more about offering to help them. And it's about talking about what we believe. It's tempting to say, "Hey, look, if you know, 1 million people were to give us $1, then and who couldn't do that, right? Then we'd have $1 million and we'd no problem." It's also tempting to say, if we could just find one person to give us $1 million, then we're done. We can go home. That's not how fundraising works, and it never has been. So the way fundraising works is you have a few people giving a lot, and you have a lot of people giving a little, and you have a bunch of some things sort of in between that as well. The Pareto principle suggests that 20% give 80%. In today's world, it's more like 20% give 90%. And the work that I've done with organizations all over the country, the range is from 87 to about 95%. So one of the statistics I look at is of your donors, if I look at the top 25% or top 20%, what percentage of the money are they giving? And the answers are in the low 90s. That's different from when I started fundraising 35 years ago, but it's relevant today because we need to be thinking about. Now, I'm not talking about when I talk about the top of the pyramid. When I talk about this sort of big this 93%, I'm 90% of money coming from 20%. I'm not talking about everybody giving $50,000. I'm talking about people giving $250 and more. So your top 20% are going to give $250 and more, and they're going to account for about 90% of the money that you're raising. The last couple things I want to just cover, just because they're sort of formative in terms of thinking through what to do now. Fundraising letters are not letters. It's tempting to think about them as letters. They look like letters, but they're really not letters. They're marketing documents, and they need to be seen that way. So the other reality, and you probably know this from your own, if you look at your own habits, you'll know that this is true. People don't read the letter. They don't read fundraising letters. So you write them, you go through all these sort of this anxiety about what to put in and what not to, and that's all fine and good, but nobody's going to read the letter. So the people who do open it, the people who do glance at it, what do they see? If they're not going to read the letter, what do they see? And we know the answer because this has all been tested up the yin yang. We know that people read the line right below the dear line, right below the salutation, the first line of the letter. We know that people read that. We know that people read the PS note at the bottom. And we know that people read things that are called callouts, that are larger type or bolded type or type that's in a different color, something that attracts attention to a specific line. When you craft a fundraising letter, you're going to craft it, from a marketing standpoint, understanding how people are going to read it. So the first line is critical. It's like the subject line in an email. If you don't get past that, no, everything's lost. The PS note needs to ask for money. Why? Because that might be the only thing they read. And if they don't get the idea that this is what the letter's about, then they're not going to be able to act on that. And there's what about photographs? Photographs are, if we put the photograph in a letter to sort of jazz it up and make it more attractive maybe. But if the photograph doesn't actually say, please give money, then it's not effective. Photographs draw the eye. People are going to, even people who just glance at it are going to glance at the photograph. If the photograph doesn't say, please give money, it's not helpful. The other sort of ironic thing is that the longer the letter, the better. So how does that work? You got a whole bunch of people who aren't reading letters, and yet a longer letter works better. I don't have a good explanation for this, but I can tell you that I've tested it. That I've split my audience into two groups. In one group, I sent a 4-page letter, and one group I sent a 1-page letter. And the 4-page letter did 35% better than the 1-page letter. So go figure. At some point, it's science. It's not communication. So trust it. It's replicable. You go in with a hypothesis. You do an experiment. You get the results, and you trust the results because they're replicable. Just buy this. There's a book on this, and it's one of the best fundraising books I've ever read. It's by Jeff Brooks, who lives in Seattle, called A Fundraiser's Guide to Irresistible Communications. And if you're in a place where you need to write a letter, you need to write a fundraising letter that's going to be effective, then read this book. It's still available on Amazon. It's about, I don't know, maybe 5 years old now. So where do we go to get started? This is the last little piece of this. And I want to I'm aware that we're sort of building new systems from scratch. So let me give you some sense about what you might want to do first. Number one, and easy to overlook, is that every single person on your board needs to give. You need to be able to say to the rest of the world, we're all in. We bought this, we're all in. We're not asking you to do something that we're unwilling to do. And so if you haven't got there, that's your number one job, is to solicit your board, get your board all on board in terms of giving money. And time is not the same thing. We need board members to give time also, but it's critical that board members give money too. Secondly, I'm going to go back to the why statement, that whole why series that I went through with Simon Sinek. Get really clear on your purpose. So an exercise that I've conducted with various different organizations is to ask people on the board to write down, in no uncertain terms, give me a couple of sentences, give me a couple of paragraphs if it takes it. I want to know what you believe. And so sort of why this particular organization, why is this an important place for your time and treasure to be invested? Because I believe that, and then finish that sentence. So you do this as an individual exercise, and you might have several reasons, in which case you might have several pieces of paper with the answers on these, and then give them to one person and have that person sort of collect the themes. Because we believe that nature is healing. Oh, we believe that that everybody drinks drinks water and breathes air, and we believe that we got to take care of that. Oh, we believe that there's a spiritual connection. Whatever the purposes are, group them together and come up with a statement for your organization that says, this is why we're doing what we're doing. If you can lead with that, according to Sinek, if you can lead with that in your materials, in your communications, in your talking to people, in your solicitation and cultivation work, then you will be more likely to reach people on an emotional level that they then will respond to with giving. Most of you have probably heard of Thousand Friends of Oregon. There's now Thousand Friends of other states. There's a Thousand Friends of Wisconsin. Thousand Friends was based on a premise of 1,000 people giving $100 a year, and that way they were going to get $100,000 a year to run their organization. It worked. It didn't work because 1,000 people gave $100, but it worked because it was a simple organizing premise that enabled them to go out and talk about the fact that they needed help. This cause was so important, it was worth your $100 to make it. And that's sort of the premise here, is that once you have the board giving and once you are clear on your purpose, then you can go out to the people your board knows, just like one degree of separation out, and tell everybody that you know that you need their help. This is so important. I'm involved. I'm on the board. I'm going to make sure that this stuff happens. Please give. I need your help. I need you to be one of the people who can give $100. This is sort of really basic level stuff. And the problem that most organizations have with it is that it's not scalable. You only have so many friends, and you can only go to them so many times, right? But this is an opportunity for you to sort of get out in the first degree of separation and ask people that you know to make a gift today. At the same time, and you can ask, by the way, we talked about seed money. The place you go for seed money is to your friends, is to people in your networks and that are known, that where you have credibility with them. I talk about having access. So if you call them up or if you email them, then they respond, you have access to them, then these are people that you have access to. And then finally, at the same time, think about what your website looks like. Does your website communicate a successful organization? Does it communicate this clarity of purpose? Is it strong on emotion through photographs and through stories and through language? Or is it more science driven, more intellectual, more sort of less emotional? And if it is, then change it, because people are going to find your website, they're going to be inspired by your website, and they're going to make giving decisions, at least in part, on your website. You need that strength of communication. And I put in clear landing page. A landing page is the page that somebody goes to in order to make a gift online. You need a clear landing page that's pretty simple. And tiny gift strategies I put that in there because a tiny gift is $1 or $2, something de minimis. And the purpose isn't that it adds up to a hill of beans, because it doesn't. I mean, I don't have to tell you. It's the dollar just doesn't go very far anymore. So if you get a couple hundred of these, it's just not going to add up to anything substantial. But what you do get out of a gift is you get their name and address. And you get the fact that they have given once. So in the spirit of, you raise money from people who've already given you money, you make this first gift as easy to make as possible. Even if it's $1, $2, $5, or whatever. From that, you get name, address, contact information, and so on. And then you can send them an appeal, a letter that says, please consider a gift of $100. And then you're off and running in terms of fundraising. Let's see, where am I here? Oh, there's on the resources page that I mentioned on my website. There's also an article by Kim Klein, who wrote a book called Grassroots Fundraising, and it's called 53 Ways for Board Members to Raise $1,000. So what she's done is she's gotten together 53 ideas for one board member to do something that will result in $1,000 being raised, and then making sure that the organization gets that money. It's dated a little bit, and there's sort of some redundancy to it. She gets up to 53. I'm not sharing it with you because those are the ideas. I'm sharing it with you because it's an interesting exercise. If you sort of read through, if your organization sort of read through what Kim Klein has put together and sort of get the feel for it, then you can have a constructive conversation around your board that says, okay, our job in the next 3 months is to raise $1,000 each one of us. So what could we do that uses things that we're already good at, that uses the land and the things that our organization is already invested in? What can we do individually to raise $1,000? And if you start to read through critically what Kim Klein has said, it will become less and less and less daunting. Here's an example. Host a taco party where you provide the tacos. People are asked to come, your friends, your family, your neighbors, whatever, are asked to come, eat tacos, and hear about the organization that you're on the board of, and that, and then make a contribution. And maybe there's a suggested donation of $20 or $50, and then tell them that you will match what they give. So maybe you have maybe you have enough to account for $1,000 all in one shot, and you don't need to match it. Maybe you raise $500 and you match it with 500. Maybe you do 3 of these to make up $1,000. But whatever it is, there's a commitment to raising $1,000. And there's 2 things that happen. There's money that comes in that can be used as seed money, but there's also some of this stuff gets demystified for the person who's the host. You could even collaborate and have a couple of people working on the same party and that kind of thing. So small events, field trips, home parties, getting the word out, putting brochures in people's hands, asking people to make a suggested donation, asking people right out to give $100. Ask people to give $20 a month for the next year and see how that feels. It's not as hard as you might imagine it would be. And finally, sort of build a mailing list. This is about a database, really. It's about collecting names and addresses that you can mail to. You can mail an appeal to your mailing list as many times as you want to during the year. Certainly 3 or 4 times a year, you could send out an appeal letter. So where are you going to find people's names? From each other. You're going to beg, buy, borrow, or steal from other organizations. You're going to collect names from events. I've taken pictures at the YMCA of their donor wall, and I've looked up their addresses in whitepages.com. Use a tiny gift campaign on your website. Collect annual reports and look people up from there. But whatever you need to do in your community, just have a systematic collection of names and addresses, and then begin to mail. Begin to request and mail to those people. Can you do it through email? Absolutely, you can do it through email, but don't do it through email instead of mailing. Do it through email in addition to mailing, because the email is not an effective substitute. Okay, so we're there. What else are you going to need? We need a website. We need a database. We need some kind of basic paper newsletter. I would say at least 3 times a year, if not 4 or 6 times a year. You want to keep the organization in front of your donor base. By basic paper newsletter, I mean an 8.5 or 11 by 17 sheet of paper that is folded once. So you end up with 4 sides that are each 8.5 by 11. And that's plenty of a newsletter to fill that up, send it out 4 times a year, and keep your organization's messaging and beliefs and all these fundraising messages in front of people, and focus on stories. So when I say what are you going to need, I mean what are you going to need in terms of stories, not in terms of data. It's not acres and species and numbers and blah 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 blah. It's stories. Tell a story about what it feels like to be, first person. Give a testimony of what it feels like to be walking through this particular area, or canoeing in this particular part of the stream, or doing whatever the things that you're doing. To tell stories that illustrate the larger points, and you will reach people on an emotional level that drives fundraising much more effectively than anything else. I'm going to stop there and see where we are. Let me see if I can stop my sharing here. I guess I can't see everybody, can I? There isn't a gallery view. Is there a gallery view?
Unfortunately, there is not, but
Okay.
I will bring my screen back up so you're not just completely talking to yourself.
That's all right.
Here I am.
So I guess my first question for you is there anything that I have said that so far that resonates, that reinforces something that you're already doing? And just I'll watch the chat, and Vanessa can watch the chat. Feel free to ask questions also. I'm just fishing for things that we can riff on later. And do you have anything already, Vanessa?
I have a couple, but I'm gonna selfishly impose my question first.
Sure.
Because I think that I can ask one that probably is in the back of a lot of people's minds. So I think one barrier that I hear from some of the smaller watershed councils is they say like, well, gosh, I'm only one person, or our staff is only 2 or 3 people, and we just don't have time. We're so stretched thin. We're jacks of all trades, and we don't have time to even do a little bit, much less build a 5-year campaign. And so if you encounter people that have sort of like a tunnel vision when it comes to that, and believe me, audience, that is not a disparaging remark. I understand the tunnel. I am also in it. But when you encounter that mindset, like what would you say to somebody whose time is already well covered and stretched? How would they manage their time such that they could put together a
campaign? You mean beyond the obvious? So there's 3 things. First is you just have to carve out time for it. And that means if that means turning off your email and silencing your phone, that's what it means. You need concentration time. You need inspiration time. You need time to go spend doing the things that are going to help you raise money. If you don't do it, then we all know what the consequences of that are, right? So this is your job. This is something that you're paid to do. You need to make sure that you do it, even if it's at the expense of something else. I mean, I get it that part-time nonprofit part-time employees are part-time pay, not part-time work, and many sort of only person in the office type employees are pulled in 50 different directions at the same time. So making time for something that's a little less comfortable is difficult. And you just have to say, on Wednesday morning from 8 o'clock until noon, I'm not going to do anything else. This is what I'm going to do. If your board has 12 meetings a year, then make 2 of them. Make the January board meeting and make the August board meeting only fundraising. The only thing that we're going to have on the agenda for those 2 meetings is fundraising. And we're going to talk about writing letters, and we're going to talk about the newsletter schedule, and we're going to talk about who's going to help with this or that or the other thing. So that's number 2, is to bring your board in to help. And number 3, which is sort of connected, is that You know, it, the idea that you have to do this all alone is crazy. Any more than you have to do everything else all alone. So find volunteers, find friends, um, find board members or board members' spouses or board members' neighbors, or find people that are connected who are willing to help. This is stuff that lends itself to many hands, making light work. So especially mailings and email and sort of things like that, newsletters. Once people sort of understand the basic drill, it's work that can be shared. We did a campaign one year where where we asked all the board members to write the appeal letters by hand, longhand. And you should have heard the groans. Oh my God, this was the end of the world. Nobody can read my handwriting. Everything under the under the sun. So we bought pizza and opened up 5 bottles of wine, and one of our board members passed out fountain pens that were all that had just been filled with ink. We had nice paper to write on. We had a model copy, and not only did they do 3 letters, there were a bunch of them that did more like 8 letters. And when the money started rolling in from handwritten letters, not only wasn't anywhere near as bad as we thought it was going to be, but when the money started rolling in because people respond to handwritten letters, everybody felt like, oh, this was great. We ought to do this again next year. Yeah. So all the
story.
trepidation was gone. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great. Okay, so there are a couple of comments now. I'll read them in order. So one says, would it be good to mail and then email for donations? Any advice on getting people to an event?
Read that again. Would it be good to?
Would it be good to mail and then email for donations? I think the question,
Yeah,
if I'm gonna interpret on behalf of this person, I think they're saying, is it okay to double ask?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I would email first. The lag time on email is probably 2 days. The lag time on mail is probably 2 weeks. So the response that you're going to get on an email is you've gotten 90% of what you're going to get inside a week, inside 5 days. And so then you can time your letter to come after that. But it would be by the time you send an email after a letter, if you were to let the letter sort of play out and then send an email, then the email doesn't seem like it's connected to the letter at all. People don't remember having gotten it. So I do it in the reverse order, but you're fine. Mm-hmm.
The second part of that question is, do you have advice on getting people to an event?
Yeah, you send out an invitation and then you call them.
Got it.
Yep. It's it's the call. You're going to get I don't know what 1 in 20 to say yes off the invitation. And other people, there's a whole bunch of people are going to say, oh yeah, we should do that this year. Oh, that'd be a great idea. That sounds like fun, blah blah. And then they don't act. So call them up and say, I hope you didn't miss this in the mail. Would love to see you there. Be my guest. Come as my guest and sit at my table.
Excellent. Somebody made a comment, it's a shorty, it just says direct mail works. And I'm going to throw my comment on top of that and say that I think that sometimes people disparage direct mail as like old fashioned or wasteful, or it's just going to go in the recycle bin. And I've heard you say things to the contrary on that. Is there anything else you want to say to expand?
Look, there is a sort of something like 4 or 5 to 1 ratio of effectiveness between paper and email. So it's a numbers game at some point, but you're going to be a lot more. You're going to have a lot more traction in general if you'll commit your requests, your news, your everything to paper in addition to email, or maybe even instead of email. If you go the other way, and there's been famous flops, or I should say infamous flops. The Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in 2009, with the economic recession, the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in Pittsburgh, the board decided that they were going to stop doing recruitment mail. They were spending about $400,000 a year on recruiting new members out of the Pittsburgh area, and they were going to cut that back to 50,000 by a factor of 8 to 1, 1 in 8. And their membership went from 12,000 to 6,000 in 3 years. And they said, "Oh, that was a mistake," and they went right back to paper and built it back up. So there is a markedly different. I'm not saying that they didn't try it. They tried everything under the sun to recruit people electronically, social media, email, everything, and they just couldn't replicate the effectiveness of direct mail. The other thing is there's been a markedly and measured decrease in effectiveness in direct mail, especially in recruitment mail, but also even in appeal mail. That's probably been going on for about 20 years. That completely reversed in 2020. With people home, people bored, people reading mail, people valuing being outside, valuing environmental and conservation messaging, direct mail became much more effective. That it just shot the curve up the other way. It was really encouraging in a lot of respects.
Well, you just provided a good segue to the next question. Funders are focusing more on social justice, food, and housing scarcity. Any tips on finding funders with an environmental focus, especially in pandemic times?
Okay, so my first reaction is funders, again, funders, and I think you're talking about foundation funders or agency funders, but even individual funders are going to make decisions based upon irrational reasons and emotion and things that are hard for, just like the slide said, that are hard for you to influence. If somebody says, "I'm not interested in funding land conservation," then you need to move on. And that's just the bottom line. Now, having said that, I think my personal opinion is that we can find ways to connect climate resiliency. We can connect clean water and access to clean water. We can connect access to nature to all those things you just mentioned. Maybe it's a little bit harder with food security, but I think you can even get there. So there's a way for us to connect what we're doing to those particular messages. But at the end of the day, if they're going to focus in a different direction, they're not going to focus on land conservation, then we need to move on and find another funder. There is plenty of money out there to support the things that we're trying to do.
Excellent. Somebody asks a question, have you tried it through Facebook events? And I'm not sure exactly what they mean, but maybe I'll broaden the question to say, do you have any thoughts in general about using the social media platform space?
Yes, and here's the difficulty for me. The organizations that are doing the best work from a social media standpoint have three things in common. The first thing they have in common is a sustained effort. So there's something happening all the time, and if we go out there 2 years from now, there's still going to be something happening. So people have come to expect that, hey, this is a place we can go for this kind of stimulation or this kind of fundraising of a friend raising event on social media. So if you're going to just do one and done stuff, it's not going to work for you. The second is they're reaching a fairly large audience. They're not dependent upon 20 people. They're dependent upon 2,000 people. So the Skagit Land Trust up in Washington State, took a pretty much a social media driven event from 500 participants to 1,500 participants, just by pulling in the social media aspect to it. They wouldn't have done that in 2019. They did do it in 2020, and it worked beautifully. And the third thing is they're also doing everything else. So they're doing direct mail, they're doing the renewal, they're doing donor stewardship, they're doing face-to-face events, they're doing all this other stuff as well, and they're doing it really well. The organizations that are trying to use social media as a way to be sort of more efficient with their time are flopping.
Got it. So it's a fundraising tool, not necessarily a fundraising tool.
And it can't be that it doesn't replace some of these other sort of basic tried and true fundraising tools.
Very good. Any advice for organizations who haven't collected mailing addresses from engaged constituents? How to request that info?
The easiest way to do that is by a tiny gift campaign. I look for there's an organization, I think it's called Access USA. Somehow I have got that on the brain, and it's always slightly wrong. So I apologize. But it's a national organization that works on securing access to public and private lands for mountain biking and rock climbing and sort of things like that. So it's an outdoor enthusiast club. And they do tiny gift campaigns that are cell phone, text-based, social media-based, and everything else. Drive people to the website where there's a pop-up and it says, please, if you like this, please give $1 right now. Boom. And then by virtue of getting the $1, they also get the name and address. And then they can send them a letter, please give $100, right? So the whole purpose of the tiny gift campaign is to encourage people to provide their name and address. Outside of that, especially with social media, Facebook doesn't give you their name and address. They only give you their email information. And that's a handicap with a lot of social media campaigns. So that would be the way that I go. If I'm in person, I'll take a sheet of paper and I'll put down 3 or 4 people's names and addresses on the top of the paper. And then the person who fills it out next is more likely to fill out their own name and address because the ones above them did it. The social proof bias. Yeah.
Here's a question for you is, so we have land trusts and watershed councils, and they often work together, and they often are seated geographically in the same places, and they deal with overlapping groups of people. And so sometimes when they are doing fundraising campaigns, they're reaching out to the same people. Do you have any advice for how 2 separate organizations can work together so that they're not splitting the baby, and so that they can try to find a way to make it like work together on a campaign without losing their individual branding? Do you have advice about that?
No. But here's a story that I can tell you. If you have one blind person sitting on a corner with a tin cup, then that person will attract a certain number of donations into that cup over the course of a day. If you have 2 people essentially half a block apart, then you are splitting the baby in the same way that you're talking about. So each individual raises a little bit less money, but more money is raised. The sum of the 2 is more money than would have been raised by either one of them individually. And the same thing is true if you're a fast food burger joint, a McDonald's, say, then would you rather be right next to Wendy's or would you rather be in a different part of the city as Wendy's? Answer, you want to be right next door because both of them will do better by virtue of being next to the other one than they would do if they were completely off to their own. It's not quite the same thing with watershed councils and land trusts, but it's very similar. That if there are more organizations that are working in the same geographic space, then the perception from the public is that that more work is going to be getting done. And there are lots of people who will give to both. Will they give the same amount to each one that they would if it was individually? No, but the amount of money that they give total is more money than they would have given otherwise. So I would say it's important messaging to say that our organization, our watershed council, our land trust, we work in partnership with organizations like, and then name them. That's an important piece of your organizational identity. It's an important piece of your organizational values. And that will resonate with other people, with people giving money. Outside of that, I don't work a lot with watershed councils. I work mostly, it's not like I haven't. I've worked with the Ipswich River Watershed Council in the Boston area, and I've worked with the San Joaquin River Parkway, which is a watershed council also in Southern California. But they're it's not a regular part of my business, and that question hasn't come up.
Okay. I have a question, and you spoke to this a little bit, so maybe just expand. But can you speak a little bit about tone of like scarcity versus abundance? So in your messaging, when you're contacting people, like I know you had said, like you focus on the stories and the outcomes rather than the amount that you're trying to save. But like let's say that you do have a situation where you're trying to raise money and it is pretty important that you get to a certain bottom line. How do you walk that line between telling the story and coming across as we're really abundant and we have everything we need and come join the fun because we're having a great time, having that kind of message versus like, gosh, we really need you, come right now because we're failing. Do you know what I mean? Like if you send a message that things are scarce, then sometimes that actually can scare people away, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you can talk about what is what is being done, or what their donation will help get done, without talking about what the organization needs. So again, it's the
Mm-hmm.
perspective of you, the donor, you want to do this, or else you wouldn't be listening to me. So we're the tool that you can use to help this thing get done, as opposed to we really need this to happen, we, as opposed to not them, and you need to help us get this done. That's a completely different paradigm, and the first one works a ton better than the second one. It's not quite a scarcity versus abundance, but the phrase that we use in fundraising all the time is people give to success and not distress. So and think about it. Why would somebody give a lot of money? Why would somebody give a significant gift, much less a sacrificial gift, to an organization that is visibly failing? Why do you step foot on a
Right.
ship that's sinking? That can't be the message.
That's right. um, so we got all of the questions from the chat box now. We're about 5 minutes away from our chosen deadline, so we could end early, but I'm sort of drawing out this statement. So if anybody has any last call kinds of questions, they have a moment to type them in.
Well, let me ask you this.
Do you
And
have
let
any
me ask the
parting words
group this.
advice?
Let me ask the group
Yeah.
this. I always say this for any kind of workshop or any kind of conference that you go to. What is the one idea that you take away from this hour and a half that makes the hour and a half worth it? You've invested an hour and a half into listening to me, and you don't know me from anybody, right? In the Midwest, we say you don't know me from Adam's off ox. Um, so why was this worth it for you? What is the one idea that you can take away and implement directly and say, that hour and a half that I invested was worth it? Just type it into chat and let's see what we get.
Well, somebody says, I am a scientist and I have a hard time to ask for money. It's not what I have experience with. Do you have any pointers? So it looks like they were responding to my call for a question.
Right. Yes, I think that first of all, I think you should not go alone. Two people who feel nervous can help each other not feel less nervous. Secondly, I think we need to, if we talk, it's easy for even scientists to talk about what you believe. If this is a passion for you, then talk about that. And third, this is something you can practice, right? So don't type up an elevator speech and everybody memorize it. Have a structured exercise as a part of a board meeting where you force yourself to talk about things that you believe in. What do you believe? Why is this important to do? How would you explain why this is important to somebody who is sort of a favored ant, somebody who is predisposed to liking you and liking what you're saying? How would you but they're not a scientist. How would you describe what you're doing and why it's important to somebody who is sort of close to you in that way?
That's right. So it says the differentiation between marketing and getting funding from those who already give. I think that was Cindy's takeaway.
There's a takeaway. Sure. Good.
Somebody else wrote, and know to focus more on stories and the why over the numbers and the results.
Right. Good.
That is a good one. And then somebody said, I can definitely improve the donations landing page on our website.
Yeah, make it less
Definitely.
complex.
Somebody said, getting to the why and clearly articulating that across all platforms.
Reinforcement. Repetition aids comprehension.
Focus on the why and the emotion, not a logical presentation of facts.
Good.
And I think that's it.
Good.
David, that takes us to the end of our time. I want to say thank you to you on behalf of the Oregon Conservation Partnership for spending your time and lending us your expertise today. It's really, really valuable. Friends who have joined us, we have recorded this session, and so it will be available into perpetuity, so you can listen to David's wise words again and again. I do encourage you to spend some time on his website. In addition to the slide deck for today, you will find all kinds of good articles, and he has a weekly blog and leads on all kinds of other information. And I think that you heard David say that he is available as hire as a consultant. So if that's something that your organization is looking to as well, you can connect with him.
What you didn't hear me say, but I will say nonetheless, is that you can call me anyway. You got consultants don't stay in business if they don't answer their phone. And I'm not going to give you a sales pitch. If you call me and ask me for an example of a good landing page, then I'm going to give you a good example of a landing page. I'm not going to try to sell you anything. So if you've got a question about fundraising, consider me a resource. Email, phone, they both work.
That is excellent, David. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks once again to the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board for making this webinar possible. And thank you to all of you for joining us. That's it. Have a good day, everyone.
Good luck, everybody.
Okay.